Okay, so how you can tell that your relationship needs a conscious clearing is any time where you notice that things feel off in your relationship, that there's maybe a lot of anxiety, fear, resentment, anger that's taking up space in your relationship. Hey babes, welcome to Codependency Alchemy, the podcast. I'm your host, Alyssa, and today I've got all my journals out. If you're watching the video on Substack or YouTube, you're going to see all these journals. Look at these. This is why it's so important to journal, because there's some wisdom in these pages. So I'm really excited about this episode because it came up in the membership around conflict and how we can resolve conflict in a healthy way. I truly believe that these practices can really help us clear the space between us and our partners so that we can have a clean slate to really bridge this level of vulnerability and connection that a lot of us feel like our relationships are lacking in. And sometimes we just need a very tangible practice to help us in navigating those types of conflicts. This episode is going to be extremely supportive for anyone who notices that conflict is a constant in their relationship. This is going to be our episode on how to have a conscious clearing with your partner. And this wisdom and this medicine comes from women and wise women that I've had the privilege of walking alongside in my life and in my journey. And I'm excited to share what I've learned from specifically two women who I've had the privilege to walk alongside. One of the women, who I think I'm actually going to show you guys a drawing of what she showed me, because I think having that physical representation of this pattern that we find ourselves in revolving around conflict can be extremely helpful. So if you're not watching the video version of this podcast, you might want to find it so that you can maybe see. My drawing is not going to be very good. You're going to get stick figures, okay? But it could still be supportive. You can watch the video podcast on YouTube or on Substack, or Codependency Alchemy Substack, and on Spotify. So the reason why I wanted to create this podcast episode on conscious clearing is because in the membership, something that I've noticed is that a lot of the women in the membership come into the chat needing support around what to do after a conflict or a rupture has happened in their relationship. And it makes sense, right? We're unlearning all these unhealthy ways of relating. We're unlearning all these unhealthy relationship dynamics and dysfunctional relationship dynamics that we're participating in and that we have a role in. But when we're healing from these things, we don't realize it a lot of times until after the fact, right? We don't realize it a lot of times until the rupture has already happened. And I really want to speak to this grace and compassion that we get to have for ourselves as we're unlearning these patterns. Like, it's going to be a process. It's not going to happen overnight. It's not supposed to happen overnight. And to really remind ourselves to put down the unrealistic expectation that it's just going to be a snap of a finger and it's all going to go away. You know what I mean? Like, I still have ruptures with Justin. We still have conflict in our relationship. That doesn't go away. But what happens is that we learn tools and we learn practices like the one I'm going to share with you today to help support us when those ruptures happen, when those conflicts happen. Relationships are not supposed to be null and void of them. Conflicts, ruptures, right? Our relationships are our fast track to healing, to joy, to pleasure. And that requires a lot of shedding of our own suffering and our own victimhood and our own limiting stories and beliefs that we tell about ourselves. Our relationships mirror those parts of us that we need to tend to so that we can come into more joy, so that we can come into more pleasure, so we can come into more play. And so when our relationships trigger us or when there's conflicts, those are really an invitation for connection. And I think that when we can start seeing conflicts as connection points as opposed to things that we need to avoid, or things that we want to be rid of, or things that we want to like, cease to exist. We're really saying that we want to lose opportunities for deeper connection. And I don't think that's what anyone really actually wants. I think we quite literally want the opposite. We want connection. So I'm hoping that in this episode, I'm going to be able to give you guys a practice that you can use in your relationship to help bridge this deeper vulnerability, this deeper understanding, this deeper compassion, this deeper witnessing of one another in your relationship that helps you guys actually get to the other side of conflict instead of like shoving it under the rug, which I think is what tends to happen in codependent relationships and dynamics, because it's too uncomfy to look at, because it's too triggering to our fear of abandonment and rejection, that we won't actually bring forward the ooey gooey vulnerable parts because we're so terrified of rejection. And it makes sense. So in this episode, I'm going to talk about what a conscious clearing is. I'm going to give you step by step how to create the environment and the structure for a conscious clearing with your partner. If this is a practice that you want to use in your relationship, this might be a really great podcast episode to share with your partner so that they can also understand the reason why this is important and the framework and how to have one and what not to do after you have one, because that's going to be like the most important piece. This only works I should say this only works if there's an agreement on what not to do after the conscious clearing, because if that is breached, this does not work. It just doesn't. It's only going to create a more toxic environment. So you really, really have to follow the framework and have really strong boundaries around what to do and what not to do after having this conscious clearing. And we're all human. We all make mistakes. We're probably going to forget. That's okay. Just making sure that there are boundaries when that is breached. And I'll tell you how to do that as well. But first, before we do the conscious clearing and the framework, I'm going to do that drawing because I think it's really helpful to have this visual representation of why a conscious clearing is important and what happens when you don't have one. And you're going to get stick figures from me because that's my artistic level. There was something else I was going to say. Yeah, I really just want to take a moment to express a deep felt gratitude to the wise women that have come before me who have taught me this, because I am really just sharing the knowledge that I've learned from the people who I've met, the books that I have read, the journeys I have done with my ancestors and my guides. Like, we're all just sharing wisdom and walking each other home. And I couldn't share this without the women who've opened up their hearts and their wisdom and shared with me. So I just want to have a moment of gratitude for the elders and the women who have come before me, who have shared this magic and this medicine. Okay. So this drawing came from who I like to call my Camino Mama. And she was a woman who I met on the Camino de Santiago, which I walked in 2016 with my brother. For those of you who don't know, the Camino de Santiago is a pilgrimage that is basically walking the entire distance of Spain. We started at the France-Spain border and walked all the way across northern Spain till we reached Santiago de Compostela. And it was a freaking journey. I learned so much about myself. I learned so much about just my way of relating. I think that was when I started really seeing how codependency had plagued my familial relationships, specifically with my brother, because I had the privilege of walking with him. I think him and I got to see a lot of our family patterns in a new way. I didn't have the language around codependency yet. I didn't realize it was codependency, but I got a deeper level of awareness around seeing how I basically took responsibility for him and his experiences, and how I didn't actually trust his resilience to move through hard things, and how that was actually benefiting me by being the person who took care of everything for him. You have to remember, I'm the oldest. I'm the oldest of three. He's the youngest of three. And I had very young parents. You know, our parents had us when they were teenagers. And so I took a lot of probably responsibility for that parent role. My brother will even say, like, you raised me. Like, when he got married, my mom was like, that's like your child getting married, because she realizes and like acknowledges that I took on a lot of the parent role growing up for my younger siblings. And I share this because when we were on the Camino, there was a lot of moments where I took like more than my share of responsibility for him, and that suffocation that caused him, and that, what word do I want to use? It's like that stifling of individuality that I basically stole from him, because it was fulfilling my own need of needing to be needed and being important. And the woman that I walked with, our Camino mama, she was able to show us this diagram, and it really helped my brother and I start to have these conversations and these conscious clearings with one another, because it was impacting our relationship in a negative way. And both of us desired to have a sovereign relationship with one another, a healthy relationship with one another. And we really got to practice these clearings together. And that really helped us in having these conscious clearings with others and our family, and with like my friends, I have them now. And with my partner, I have them now. And I noticed that I do it kind of right away, because I know the positive impact that happens when I don't let it fester. And so many of us let it fester, and I let it fester for so long, and so many years of my life and all my relationships. And that really brought up so much resentment. And that's what happens when we don't actually allow ourselves to clear the space between two people. So the way that she explained it to me is, I'm going to use my relationship as an example. So I'm drawing this picture. Oh gosh. Don't judge me on my art skills, okay? So here's a picture of me, right? There's me in the center of this circle. And what this represents is, when I'm born into this world, I am born whole, I am born sovereign, I am born complete. But what happens in life is that we get all of this conditioning, basically. This can be from society, this can be from school, this can be from our families. These are just like expectations that are placed on us, ideals that are placed on us, characteristics that are placed on us, just all the things that we end up absorbing. And so in this sovereign space, you start seeing all these, I drew them as X's. So it's just taking up all this space, like, oh, I need to be pretty, I need to be skinny, I need to be liked, I need to have good hair, like all of these things fills up this energy field between me and my sovereignty. And then what ends up happening is we come into relationships with other sovereign souls, right? Who get their own conditioning. So now you've got me, we're going to call him Justin, your partner, whatever their name is. And they come forward with all of their conditioning, all their stuff, all their baggage, all their shit. Okay. The X's is all the shit that these can be limiting beliefs. These can be stories, etc., about who we should be and how we should be. So then we come into relationship with one another, right? Two beings, maybe forgetting their sovereignty because they're carrying all this shit in their energy field. And then there's the space in between them, Okay, I'm just going to draw it like a rectangle in between them, right? So what happens in conflict is that we take the shit, right? The X's, the ideals, the expectations, and we start throwing them at each other. So now I'm throwing the X's, the shit, whatever my shit is, at Justin. He's throwing all his shit at me. And these are expectations. These are beliefs. These are projections, right, of one another. Because of what we've been taught about how to relate, what we've been taught about relationships, whatever our unresolved trauma is, we're throwing it at each other, right? Because it's unresolved. We haven't looked at it. We haven't tended to it. We haven't cleared it from our field. So now we're just throwing it because it's uncomfortable. And this is the only way that we've learned how to relate. And so then what happens when you start throwing it at each other is that it takes up all this space in between you. So now see all these fucking X's in between you and your partner. Okay? This is why conflicts keep coming up. Is because this space between you and your partner continues to get filled up every single conflict that doesn't have a clearing, that doesn't have a repair, that doesn't have a tending to, that doesn't have a moment where we say, hey, this is what I did. This is what I wish I would have done. I am sorry. We don't do that. And so it just builds up all this shit in between the two people. And then when you have that much shit built up between two people, it creates a wall, right? And you are not able to see your partner clearly. That's why in the beginning it was like, oh, it was so beautiful and it was so special and I felt so connected and I felt so seen. It was like, because you could see them, because you didn't have all this shit in between you. But now you can't even see that person. You don't even see them through the same lens, because there is a wall quite literally between two people. So of course you don't see them the same way, because you got so much shit built up in between you guys that you're seeing them through shit. So what you're experiencing is shit. You're seeing a shitty version of the person who you started dating, because there's quite literally shit between you two. So what a conscious clearing does is it takes that shit in between the two of you and it wipes it clean. We're gonna see this as like a waterfall. Whoosh, clear it, goes out the bottom, and then we're gonna use another page. And then you've got, whoa, my people got bigger. Way bigger. Maybe that's a good thing. Then you've got two sovereign people connected, nothing between them. No X's in their fields because they're tending to it. They're doing the work. They're clearing it as it comes up. Maybe you still have some, because I mean, we're humans, so we kind of like take on stuff, but maybe it's not as intense because we've like done some clearing around it, right? But the importance is that there's nothing between the two of you, because you have, because this is hard to do with one hand. This is hard to do with one hand and holding the mic, because there's nothing between the two of you, because you have these conscious clearings. And when you have these conscious clearings, you're able to connect, you're able to see each other in a different way. And so I quite literally feel like Justin and I, before we broke up, right, we had so much shit in between us. And that's why I felt resentful. That's probably why he felt resentful. And neither one of us were talking about it, because we didn't have words for it, because we weren't doing the work, because we weren't talking about what was driving us crazy, or what was, causing harm. But now we have these clearings. When anything comes up that feels uncomfortable, when anything comes up that we don't like, when anything comes up that feels icky, sticky, yucky, we have this conscious clearing, and we clear that space between the two of us, and then we can actually see each other for who we are and not for the shit between us. Okay? That is the visual. I hope you guys like my drawing. I hope the visual was helpful. if you're not watching the video of this podcast, definitely just go look so you can get that visual, or just go check out Substack, and I'll leave that in the show notes below. So go check it out, because sometimes just having a visual representation of something can help you anchor into and see it from a different lens than just like hearing it. It just helps it concrete maybe a little bit more. So now we're going to go ahead and get into how to do a conscious clearing. There's really only 3 steps. So this is very simple, and it takes 10 minutes of your time. And you can do this whenever there is a conflict. However, I would do it at a neutral time, and I'll get into why. Okay, so how you can tell that your relationship needs a conscious clearing is any time where you notice that things feel off in your relationship, that there's maybe a lot of anxiety, fear, resentment, anger that's taking up space in your relationship. You're noticing that you've got a low tolerance. Maybe your temper is like easily going through the roof during certain conversations. That can just be a great indicator showing you that there might be a lot of shit in between the space between you and your partner. So when you want to do a conscious clearing is at a neutral time, because if you try to do it in the heat of the moment is usually hot because someone is dysregulated or both people are dysregulated. And when one or both of you are in a state of dysregulation, there's going to be a tendency to defend yourself as opposed to being able to actively listen and witness the other person. When you try to have these clearings, if you will, if you try to resolve a conflict when you're dysregulated, it is going to be nearly impossible. I don't know that it ever actually works, in fact, unless one partner is just like throws up their hands and is like, fine, whatever, you win. Which at that point, I don't know if they're even saying that from a genuine place or a place of just like, this is uncomfortable and I want to get out of it, which is that really a clearing or is that a shoving under the rug? I would kind of assume that it's the latter. So having it at a neutral time means that you're both more in a state of receptivity than you would be if you were dysregulated. Because when you're dysregulated, it's usually because a younger part of yourself, a triggered part of yourself or activated, is at the surface and is trying to reconcile a core wound that it is experiencing in the moment, and in which case that is why we defend. So you'll want to do it at a neutral time. That is the win. You'll want to do it like when you're having breakfast or when you go out to dinner, just a really like spacious time when like things are good, because when things feel good and don't feel heightened or like stressful, it can allow for that receptivity. So then if you've found, or when you've found that neutral time, the first thing that you will need to do, and I say need because if you don't do this, the state of receptivity is not there. And if the state of receptivity is not there, again, it goes back to things will be defensive and that won't work. The first thing that you'll need to do is ask for consent. And so what that looks like is, hey, I would love to have a conscious clearing with you so that we can clear the space between us and see each other with more loving, compassionate eyes. Does it sound weird? Yeah. Is it going to feel a little creepy? Yeah. Let it. That's my 2 cents around it. Let it feel weird. Let it sound weird. When I say these things to Justin, he'll even say like, you're being weird. And I'm like, I hear that you feel like this is weird and it's still important to me. Like, let it be weird. I'm not going to try to pretend like it's not. I get it. It is. It feels weird. It sounds weird. But what's worse, sounding weird and having these like, it's weird because it's not something that we've learned and it's not something that we've normalized. We've learned and normalized how to like bicker at each other. So you can choose to continue to do it that way. Like, no pressure, like, go nuts. But that isn't getting me deeper connection and cultivating a safe space for vulnerability and really clearing the space. It's just like creating more shit. So like, I'll be weird if that means that I get to experience my relationship in a completely different way that's actually more aligned to how I desire to feel. I'll be weird if that's what it means that I get. And so I'm just going to name that. So you'll want to ask for consent. Hey, I'd love to have a clearing with you. My intention behind the clearing is so that we can see each other in a more loving, compassionate way, and just make sure that neither one of us is holding on to any resentments. And this is not just for me, like, this is for you too. This is for both of us. And so if they consent and they say, okay, yeah, they don't need to be like, yeah, that sounds great, I would love to have one. Like, let's be real. They're going to be like, sure. Or like, do we have to? You know, it's probably going to be a little, I just want to say, like, don't have the expectation that they're going to be like fucking snapping their fingers and like, yeah, this is the greatest idea I've ever heard of. Like, maybe they do, and that's awesome. I've never received that. Like, it's usually, in my experience, you know, like, sure, like, okay, or like, how long is this going to take? You know, and just let it. That's fine. It doesn't need to be perfect. So if they say no, what I would do is I would ask them more questions. Like, can you tell me more about your no? What's coming up for you around this, and why do you not want to do it? Just to understand them better. And then I would just hear them, and I would thank them for sharing why it's a no for them. And then I would maybe come back to it another time, because that no might be triggering for you. Actually, I'm not going to say that it is triggering, but it might be. I know for me, sometimes it is when Justin says no. And when I say sometimes, I mean all the time. Whenever he tells me no, it's triggering. So I usually take that time to just like, thank you for sharing your truth with me and your experience, and maybe we can come back to this another time. And then I'll usually like go and do my own shadow work and tending to myself, because I don't like being told no. And I don't think anyone likes being told no. So I just like make sure I don't project onto him and like make him feel bad for his no, because ultimately I want to support autonomy and honor autonomy, and his no is valid even though I don't like it. I do respect it even though I don't like it. So I'm gonna go tend to the part of me that doesn't like it, so I don't project onto him. This is what it means to have like authentic, autonomous relationships. It's a lot of work, but it is so worth it. It really is. So if they say yes, what you'll want to do is create the environment and let them know the plan. That's why this episode might be really great to have them listen to, so that they can also hear it as well. Both people get to talk. It's kind of like, you know, a talking stick, but you don't have to like go that woo-woo with it. You can if you want, but you just need a timer. You need both people sitting in a space. You don't need to sit like in any special way, but I do encourage you guys to sit, you know, across from each other if you can, and, you know, looking at each other. I think it is really helpful to kind of have that intimacy and create that space. And so the first person gets 3 to 5 minutes. So you and your partner decide, do you want 3 minutes, 4 minutes, 5 minutes? Or you can just decide, hey, we're going to start with 3 minutes. And in those 3 minutes, your partner gets to say anything and everything that they are feeling around you and your relationship. Anything. And it doesn't have to be in this like nonviolent communication way, because I think that can really hinder us a lot of times. It can be messy. It can be like, I'm fucking pissed because you always ask me to do the dishes and it's annoying. Like, I don't want to fucking do them. Like, it gets to be like that. They get to just vent. They just get to go in on everything that they're holding. And remember, as the listener, when they're going in and just like saying all the shit, remember and keep it in your mind's eye, that visual and that picture that I showed you about the shit between you and the other person. And I want you to see it as a waterfall clearing all that shit. Okay? rather than seeing it as them throwing their shit at you and you needing to absorb it. No. Okay. The visual is, this is the shit that's been living between the two of us. And every word that he says is like water washing it away. So you want it, like, bring it on, let it come out, let it come through, because it's just clearing the space between the two of you. So I want you to keep that in mind, because a part of you might take it on and be like, oh, he hates me, he doesn't love me, he's gonna leave me, like he's holding all this shit. Remember, it's clearing between the two of you. It's not coming into your field and sticking on to you unless you let it. So don't let it. Just be a sacred witness. It's not your responsibility. You don't need to fix it. He's not saying that you don't get to ask for help with the dishes. He's just clearing all of his shit, the shit between the two of you. So when that timer beeps, you look at him or them, you look at them and you say, I see you. I hear you. I am sorry. Just notice how that feels in your body. I can already like feel the energy of people being like, sorry, like, why do I have to apologize? We're going to get into why in a second. Okay. I see you. I hear you. And I am sorry. When they're sharing, you do not say a fucking word. You do not nod. You do not put a hand on them. You do not shake your head. You do not roll your eyes. You are just a sacred witness. You are sitting, you are looking at them, you are listening, you are not responding with any form of looks, touches, anything. And you end with, I see you, I hear you, I am sorry. Period. Okay? I'm so grateful I learned this from one of my previous mentors. It's such a great practice. The next person goes. So maybe you started and then it's your partner's turn. Either way, it doesn't really matter who goes first. Whoever didn't go goes next. Set the timer for 3 to 5 minutes. That person gets to say everything and anything that's on their mind. Remember that it is not in response to what they said. So you are not defending why you do or did whatever they were complaining about. That's not what we're doing. That's called fighting. Because you're now defending why you do what you do. That's not what we're doing here. Whatever they said, you are not responding to. This is not a you talk, I respond. This is a now I'm clearing all the shit, all the resentment, all the things that I've been shoving deep down inside, right? You don't hang out with me, you don't spend time with me, all you do is play video games. Like those are things that I would probably say, right? Justin's probably going to complain about the dishes. I'm going to complain about the video games, and we're just going to clear that space between us. Okay? You're not responding to their complaints and their clearing and what they said. You're just speaking whatever burdens that you're holding on to, whatever thoughts you're holding on to, whatever shit that you're just shoving deep down inside you. And remembering that doing this is that waterfall. It is clearing that space between you two. And their job is to say the same thing. I see you. I hear you. I am sorry. That's it. And they are also not meant to nod. And if they also don't critique them. If they happen to nod or something, don't be like, don't nod. Like, just, okay. Like we're human. We're going to make mistakes. It's just like, that's what we're going for. That's what we're aiming to do, right? It's not going to be perfect every time, but just try. Do your best. That's all we can do. Okay. So now we're going to touch in on the I'm sorry part, because I can already feel you guys being like, why do I need to apologize? Or the fear around apologizing. Well, if I'm sorry, then isn't that admitting my fault? No. Apologizing does not mean that you are admitting fault to whatever they said. Apologizing is, I don't want to say simply because it's so impactful. Saying I'm sorry is validating their experience and your impact on their experience, even if it wasn't intentional. What you do when you say I'm sorry is you're saying I see you in your experience and how you received what I said or what I did, and I validate that truth that you have. It doesn't mean it's the truth, it's their truth. And what ends up happening in conflict is we're trying to convince people to change their truth. We're trying to get them to see our truth and say that our truth is the truth. And that's why we keep circling in the same conflicts over and over and over again, because we're continuously invalidating the other person's experience. Apologizing is acknowledging and validating the person's experience of you. It does not mean that you intentionally meant for them to have that experience. It just means, hey, I can hear and see that you had this experience of me, and I am sorry for that. This is so deeply fucking healing, you guys. It is so deeply healing. Here's why we don't do it. Here's why we defend. And here is why we are terrified to say I'm sorry for their truth. We're terrified that if we say I'm sorry, that it admits fault. And if we admit to fault, then that ends up being something that can be used against us and a reason why that person would have justified reason to leave us. Okay, this is what I realized for myself. I didn't want to admit fault because if I admitted fault, then that would mean that I was bad. And if I was bad, then that means that I wouldn't be a good person to be in a relationship with. And if I wasn't a good person to be in a relationship with, then why would someone be in a relationship with me ever? And then I'm not deserving of love. And I'm going to end up alone. We have to see the shadow behind why we're so fucking hell-bent on defending ourselves. It's because this part of us thinks that if we're not perceived as the good person in the situation or the relationship or the conflict, that we're going to end up alone, that we're going to be a bad person, unlovable, shouldn't be someone to be in a relationship with. We're going to end up alone. So now I'm going to bite my teeth down and I'm going to really try to get you to believe my truth, which is I'm a good person. You should be in a relationship with me. You're the one who did the wrong thing, not me. Let's just take a moment for that part of ourselves, okay? It makes sense why we're so hell-bent on defending ourselves. But what we're missing and what we're not seeing is how that is perpetuating some of our greatest fears, because it's creating more dissonance and more separation in our relationships. Because the more I defend myself and try to get you to believe and see my truth and agree that my truth is the truth, we invalidate the other person's experience. And in invalidating their experience, we create more separation. We create more distance. We create less connection and less vulnerability, which pulls us further apart. So if you desire connection, if you desire vulnerability, if you desire a sacred and safe space between two people, that means you hold two truths at the same fucking time. Their truth and your truth. And when we can do that, you're going to see a huge difference in how you and your partner relate to one another. Because let's be real, most conflicts come because both people are defending themselves rather than just saying, thank you for sharing your experience. I see you in it. I love you and I'm sorry. I would just try it. I would try it for 30 days. Every time you want to fight, every time they're barking at you, every time they're complaining, if instead you don't say, well, the reason why I did that and the reason why I asked, and well, I do this and this and this. And so and if we, instead of doing that, just said, thank you so much for sharing that with me. Thank you so much for sharing your truth. I really appreciate seeing you in that way. I'm sorry. And you do that for a month, watch things fucking change. I'm just saying. And if it doesn't, and if it gets worse, then don't do it. Then you can totally stop and you can go back the other way. But we're not doing this, and we're doing the other thing, and the other thing isn't giving us the type of relationship and connection that we want. So why would we keep doing it that way if we know it's not working? Why wouldn't we just try this way and just see what happens? And I can tell you from my experience, when I do that with Justin, he almost 9 times out of 10 will also apologize and take accountability for something. And I'm just like, I didn't even have the expectation for him to do that. But when we come in with that compassion, they meet us in that compassion. That's why I say, like, our relationships are a mirror. If you don't like what you see what your part is in it. If you're getting met with hot fire flames and like heat, where are you being hot fire flames and heat? Like, our relationships need water. They need compassion. They need empathy. They need love. They need grace. And if you're providing your relationship with that like water element, that like compassion, that love, and that grace, and you're still being met with fire, and they're still blaming you until they're blue in the face, then I would just like sit down, look at my partner and be like, what is going on? What do you need? What do you need right now? How can I support you? Like, so many of us, you guys, are navigating some really tricky unresolved trauma. But at the end of the day, that does not mean that you get to be somebody's punching bag. And it doesn't mean that somebody else gets to be yours, right? Which is why boundaries are so, so, so important. So I want to get into boundaries a little bit with this last note on a conscious clearing. The big post conscious clearing rule is that you do not, I repeat, you do not use the other person's vulnerability and their share against them at a later time. Whatever was said in the clearing is cleared. You do not bring it back up. Period. If you're upset and you're triggered by it, you go do your own work on it. But you do not bring it up at a later time. Why did you say that I am mean when I ask you to do the dishes? Nope. It's cleared. Leave it. You do not get to bring it up. Because what that ends up doing is it is weaponizing their vulnerability, and all you're doing when you bring it up at a later time is you say that I don't create a safe space for us to actually have a clearing, because now I'm going to use it and I'm going to use it against you and I'm going to bring it up now. Oh, well, you think I'm just too much. No, like, that is not creating a safe environment for your partner to share vulnerably. And if you ever do a conscious clearing again, I can guarantee they're not going to say shit, because they don't feel safe to say anything, because you're just going to use it against them. So make sure you are checking yourself and you're not using their vulnerability against them. This conscious clearing is that waterfall. It's clearing the space between the two of you. It is done. It is cleared. Do not put that shit back in between the two of you. Go do your inner work. And if you happen to be human and accidentally do it, have the repair and take accountability and responsibility. I use the thing that you said in the conscious clearing against you, and that wasn't fair. And I don't want you to feel like you are not safe to share what is really coming up for you. I am sorry, and I'm taking responsibility, and you deserve better. Take responsibility for your actions if you find yourself using it against them. Okay? Now, if it's reversed and they're using it against you, that's where boundaries come in. So if they bring up something that you said in the conscious clearing, I would just say, oh, I hear you bringing up something that I mentioned in the clearing. It sounds like maybe you want to have another one. When would you like to have one? So you're not saying, hey, I'm going to have this discussion with you and go back and forth on it. No, like set the environment and let them know that this is something that you guys can discuss in your clearings, but it's not something that gets to be discussed outside of that. And if they keep going in and being like, no, I don't need to have another clearing, I just want to like discuss, just be like, yeah, we absolutely can discuss this in a clearing. When would you like to do that? And you can just say, I'm not available to talk about this outside of having the clearing with you. And if they get huff and puff about it, like they get to have their feelings about it. I just always tell Justin, like when he gets huff and puff about it, like you get to be upset about this. You get to be upset about this. Because a lot of times when we set boundaries, it is confronting to our partners, especially if they're triggered or activated or dysregulated. And so I just validate their experience. Like, you get to be upset. I see you in it. And I'm happy to discuss this in a time that is neutral for both of us. When would you like to do that? I'm not saying that I'm not willing to have the conversation. I'm not saying that I'm not willing to talk about it. But I am saying that I'm not going to let you sit here and use it against me and start a fight, because I'm not here for that. I'm not here to fight. I'm not here to defend myself. I'm not here to make you wrong or make me wrong, but I am here to create safe spaces for us to share our truths. And in the middle of the day on a Tuesday after having a clearing with you is not the time. But here is the time. So that's called a boundary. And it's my responsibility to enforce it. So if he keeps going and keeps going and keeps going and is not listening to my boundary, I don't need to become the victim and say he doesn't respect my boundaries. I get to say, I hear you and I see you and this sounds really important to you. And I've let you know that we can have this discussion at a neutral time. When would you like to have it? If you continue talking to me about this right now, I'm going to remove myself and come back in an hour. That is how I enforce the boundary. If you are unable to meet me in that boundary, then I'm going to remove myself. And so now I'm letting him know, if he keeps talking to me about it right now, I am going to leave our physical home and go do something to make sure that that boundary is respected. There's so many podcast episodes, I think, on boundaries. So hopefully go find one of those. Or maybe I need to do a whole nother podcast episode on boundaries. I know that there is a whole masterclass and post on boundaries I'll leave in the show notes that is going to be really, really important if you struggle with boundaries in your relationship. Again, boundaries are ours to enforce, not our partners. We get to invite people into meeting us in our boundaries, but just because we allow them the opportunity to meet us in our boundaries doesn't mean that they're capable or have capacity to meet us in those. And that doesn't have to mean anything bad or negative about them. It just means they're unable to meet us in it. And so now we need to enforce it in our own ways by usually removing ourselves from the situation or the environment. At least that's the only way that I've really learned how to enforce a boundary, is by physically removing myself. If that means I need to go into my room and shut the door, if that means I need to just go for a walk, if that means I need to go work at a coffee shop that day, like whatever I need to do to make sure that that boundary is enforced. So, this episode got a little long, but there was a lot to say. And I really, really hope this gives you the framework to support you in your relationship and having these clearings. I will say from my experience, when I have these clearings with people in my life, and I've had these clearings with my family, I've had it with my partner, I've had these conscious clearings with friends, and I just approach it in that way. I just say, I ask for consent to have a clearing. And I ask for consent to have a clearing whenever I feel like something is off between me and another person. And it has honestly been the scariest thing that I've probably ever done, because it's vulnerable, and vulnerability is scary. I'm just going to name that. But it is also the thing that has bridged so much connection, and has also shown me people who maybe aren't aligned in my life anymore because they're unable to hold space for that vulnerability. And that's okay. but it has given me a lot more clarity around discernment of who I desire to have in my life and who maybe isn't aligned or in resonance anymore. And those are the people who can't have those clearings with me, who make me wrong or bad for having those clearings. That's just showing me the people who can't meet me in my authenticity. And that's okay, like I said, but it's also my responsibility to make sure that if I am wanting to be an authentic human being, which I desire to be more authentic than I ever have before, that will require me making sure that I have people in my life who I can be authentic with. And there's grief in that because you lose people on this journey. But you also gain so much depth in the relationships and the people who are able to meet you, even if it's not perfect. It is going to be messy in the beginning. It's not going to be black and white. There's a lot of gray space, but as long as someone's willing to do it and do it messy with you, that is profound. So don't discredit anyone who isn't doing this by the book. Justin and I are still not doing it by the book. There's still times where I like nod when he's talking and I'm like, oh, don't nod, so we don't need to be hypercritical of one another. Just if they're willing to do it and they're willing to do their best and you're willing to do it and willing to do your best, then definitely take that to heart and hold some compassion and grace for yourself and for everyone who you have these clearings with. So that's what I have for you guys today. Thank you so much. I'd love to hear how this podcast resonated with you and if it was supportive. And I'll do a full write-up on this on our Substack post for this podcast episode. So if you want to see it written out, just make sure you go to the show notes and you can check out the full Substack post with the write-up there. And don't forget, if you are wanting support, if you want to join our Codependency Alchemy membership and our community over on Substack, you can become a paid subscriber and get access to bonus masterclasses, monthly meditations, all kinds of support. Even more so, our Codependency Alchemy chat, where there are hundreds of people supporting one another in the tricky, sticky moments that come up in everyday life. And I'm in that chat every single day, pretty much responding, supporting, connecting with anyone who has stuff coming up. It's just a great place to go to when things feel hard and when you feel alone in something. The community that we've built over on Substack is just, it's something that dreams are made of, honestly, and my dreams of a community that just gets it and that is willing to do this inner work. And for me, it's been a safe place to be witnessed in really, really uncomfortable things that come up for me. So if you want full access to all of the exclusive pieces of content, make sure that you join the Substack membership, Codependency Alchemy, for $63 for a whole year of support for podcast listeners. You can get that special discount in the show notes below. And I would be honored to have you join our membership. That's what I have for you guys today. I love you so much, and I hope you have a beautiful day. I'll see you next week. Bye.